This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
The word demon only appears in the Old Testament just a couple of times, but it's not based on the same word, obviously, as the word demon in the New Testament, given that the Old Testament is written in Hebrew and not Greek. But there are entities there if you care to look for them. Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert, joining us again for our monthly Iron and Myth Roundtable, the usual panel. And this month we are glad to have Dr. Judd Burton back with us, the director of the Institute of Biblical Anthropology. Also joining us, the author of Giants, Sons of the Gods, now available in its expanded, revised 10th anniversary edition, the pastor of the Reformed Baptist Church of Northern Colorado, Doug Van Dorn. Almost called you doctor, but I think that's deserved, even if not official. And award-winning screenwriter and novelist, Brian Godawa. Gentlemen, welcome. This is going to be a fascinating one because this is another one of those episodes where when we start peeling back the English, we find that there's a lot more going on in the Bible than we thought. Judd, you didn't get in on last month's discussion, but even though we don't see demons per se the way we do in the New Testament, what with Jesus and the apostles casting demons out of people, where would we look if we were trying to find something like demons in the Old Testament?
There aren't many places that you're not going to find them. Some of the more obvious choices are, of course, going to be like Genesis and throughout the Torah, but any passage that has an eschatological, apocalyptic bent is typically going to make reference to those sorts of things. We're finding out more now, and I say now, but within the last quarter century, that the taxonomy of the demonic realm is quite a bit more complicated than simply angels and demons. I think we could point to any number of scholars who have helped to flesh that out, not the least of which is our good friend, the late Dr. Mike Kaiser. But there are a couple of passages that come to mind. Of course, the Genesis 6 passage that most people would be familiar with. But there are other ones too that are worth considering, such as the one referencing the activities of the Witch of Endor, and that's probably as good a passage as any to begin, because it introduces that word Ob, a familiar spirit that forms the basis of a lot of in generic terms, what we might term Old Testament demonology, because of the types of methods and means that were used to consult them by the pagan cultures amidst which the ancient Hebrews lived. So again, we're looking at an ancient Near Eastern mindset that incorporates and encompasses the broad palette of these kinds of demonic entities. It's just that the ancient Hebrews had a special revelation on the nature of those kinds of things. I remember years and years ago when I was in graduate school reading Merrill Unger's work on biblical demonology, and it was which I think was his dissertation for the seminary he was at. I want to say that he was at, and I want to say he's a graduate of Southwestern. But Unger was really the first book that I ever read, his biblical demonology, that really got me thinking about Old Testament demonology, because he did such a good job of making a lot of those concepts digestible. And so I put forward that we begin with that concept of the Ob, which I know, Derek, you've done quite a bit of work on in connection with the necromantic ritual pits that we find not only in the ancient Levant, but also in really throughout ancient Anatolia and also in Mesopotamia.
Yeah, it was the New English translation that kind of led me in that direction, and it connected the ov. And I think this is one of those Hebrew words where the B is pronounced with a V.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a Hebrew speaker, correct me if I'm wrong, because if so, I've been doing it wrong for a couple of years now. Anyway, the New English translation in 1 Samuel 28 has a note that explains that the word ov, which is usually translated as necromancer in the Old Testament, actually means owner of a ritual pit. And cited a work by a gentleman named Harry Hoffner, who is a very well-known Hittiteologist of the 60s and 70s. And I was able to find his paper on the etymology of that word. And turns out that ov is etymologically connected to the Abzu,
Mm-hmm.
the abyss of the Sumerians, the domain of the god Enki, but also to an older Hurrian word called the Abi, A-B-I. And the Hurrians were the biblical Horites, but they were a people that traveled from the mountains or the plains of Ararat, which is that the area below the mountains where Noah's Ark came to rest in Armenia. And they know this because apparently they had a very unique style of pottery. So we can trace this practice back. They found one at the oldest known Hurrian city called Urkesh, which is in northeastern Syria, very close to the border with Turkey. Again, just tracing them back, we can basically trace this practice back to middle of the 4th millennium BC. And the Hurrians obviously brought it with them when they migrated into the Levant and settled in the land that became Canaan. And clearly, 2,000 years, 2,500 years after that old Abi found in northeastern Syria, there was somebody practicing that ritual with a ritual pit and summoning spirits from the netherworld. But the understanding, of course, is that we're talking about not spirits of the dead, but the demonic spirits who were the spirits of the Nephilim destroyed in the flood. Very interesting and very ancient practice that goes back into the prehistoric era, back before writing, back before the invention of the wheel. It's before man invented the wheel, we were trying to speak to the spirits of the dead, the demonic spirits. And so the reference here in 1 Samuel 28 is not as obvious on its face as it might be without that historical context. But clearly the woman who Samuel hired to bring up Samuel, or that Saul hired to bring up Samuel, was startled when she didn't see her familiar spirit. She was expecting to see a demon, and instead the text says it was Samuel who came up. I know there are Christians who disagree there. I think if it wasn't Samuel, the Bible would have said she thought it was Samuel, but it wasn't. It was a lying spirit or something. But no, it says it was Samuel, and Samuel spoke to her. Anyway, so that certainly is something that was well known because Saul's advisors knew what she was and knew where to find her. So clearly it was a practice that was pretty well known in the time of David.
Yes, and that word, its linguistic residues undoubtedly stayed in Turkey. There's a case to be made for later languages preserving that idea in words, Turkic words like upir and Ukrainian words like upiri that eventually end up as vampire in the various Slavic tongues. So that there's a definite linguistic case to be made for that connection being long lasted and preserved in later languages.
I didn't expect to hear vampires in this conversation today, but that's certainly appropriate and not, I guess, not too surprising when you think about it. Brian, you've done a lot of research into the spirit realm going back to and even before, well, all the way back to the time of Enoch, as part of your Chronicles of the Nephilim series. What have you encountered regarding demons or demonic entities in the Old Testament?
For me, there's a couple interesting things in the scripture that you mentioned by saying, talking about the English. We read the English, and it hides some of the original meanings behind the language. And one of those meanings is the demonic world. And so there's a couple things. One is something we've talked a lot about, and we could still talk more about it, and that is this notion of the gods of the ancient world, the pagan gods, having some demonic reality to them. And there are a lot of passages we've already, like I said, we've talked a lot about some of these, but we could summarize those as well. But there's two other elements. One is the sort of the language of the demonic in relation to God's judgments, and the other is actual demonization of the names of certain characters. So that's kind of a sidetrack, but the first, well, you know what? I'll take that, because that'll be something unique to me. And that is, so in the course of my studying for each of my novels, you look into the meanings of names and such. And one of the interesting things is there's a demonization of names of people or of beings. So for instance, Jezebel was one of my more favorite ones. As I did research for my novel on that, I found out that her name was actually Isabel in Tyre, which means where is the prince? And the prince was Baal, Prince Baal, right? Mm-hmm. Isabel. But in Hebrew, Zabel, which is similar but not the same, means dung. And so in the Bible, they're actually changing her name so that it's literally making fun of the Baal and turning her name into a name of dung, like a prince of dung. So in 2 Kings 9:37, we read about when she dies, the corpse of Jezebel shall be as dung on the face of the field in the territory of Jezreel, so that no one can say this is Jezebel. But kind of interesting there, where they're mocking the god Baal in the name itself. But then, of course, we all know Beelzebub, right, in the New Testament. And the actual name is Beelzebul, which means Baal is prince. Mm-hmm. And that's the original name. And in the Ugaritic text, for example. But then by calling him Beelzebub, or Beelzebub, or Beelzebul, that actually means Lord of the Flies. So they're changing the name Baal as prince to Lord of the Flies, which is a mockery, and that's kind of an attack on the god, and that's not necessarily outright demonic. But another element is when they do name some of the gods, they will, like for instance, there's two gods, Molech and Ashtaroth, and of course we've talked about Molech a lot. The consonants could be read in multiple ways. But the vowelization of it, some scholars have pointed out that Molech, the vowels there, is using the consonants MKM or whatever it is, that sometimes they interpret it as Milcom, right? But they claim that the word Boshet, which means shame in Hebrew, they're using the vowels of Boshet and putting it in the name of the MKM, which comes out with Molech. So that's another sort of like mockery. And they do the same thing with the goddess Ashtaroth. The goddess Ashtaroth is actually Ashtart in its original language, Phoenician language, but they're adding the vowels of Boshet, which is shame. They're inserting that into giving it the name Ashtaroth. So they're taking these pagan deities, and they're mocking them, and they're degrading them. Now that's not so much demonic, but it certainly is. If you give the premise that there was a belief that there was demonic reality behind these other gods and such, then there's a form of interesting mockery that I found as I did my research on all the different names.
So since Paul was clear in his letters that what some eat that was sacrificed to idols are actually have been sacrificed to demons, and that the errant teachings that were being put out by false teachers were literally doctrines of demons. that some of these named entities that appear in the Old Testament, again, kind of concealed by the English, might not be angelic beings. Well, I guess angelic beings, they would be, in fact, the disembodied spirits of the giants who'd decided to influence people into giving them worship.
Yeah, that name thing, Brian, is, I think of exorcisms, and especially in the movies and stuff. But you read Malachi Martin and stuff like that, and learning what the creature's name is becomes very important in the exorcism in a lot of these circumstances. Of course, it doesn't matter to Jesus, but with kind of more pop exorcisms or whatever, if you want to call them that, the name is so important, and so also the whole idea of the name itself, there's some sort of a power in the name. So when you're renaming them in a mocking sort of way, like, you can't get any more to the heart of an entity and having a kind of a power over it than mocking their names. That's pretty interesting how you brought that out.
There's another element too that I think this could launch us into a good long discussion, and that is that we've talked a lot on this program about the desert and, well, the sea, right? The sea represents many things, but one of the things it most represents is chaos. Thus, you have Leviathan, the sea dragon of chaos. We've talked extensively about that. There's a certain spiritual demonic being, so to speak, but also the desert. And the desert is something that's it's got a lot of elements to it that are demonic. So the desert is often also connected to the world of chaos. And it's interesting because the desert is sort of the opposite of the waters, right? It's literally waterless places. So much so that, Jesus, when he's talking about demons, he actually describes how when a demon leaves a man, he goes over waterless places, and like, what does that mean, And then, of course, when he casts the demons out of the demoniacs don't cast us into the abyss, and he casts them into the waters, right? And so there's this notion of understanding that demons cannot be over watery places, and maybe there's something also connected to the flood in that, right? How the original were trapped in the flood and such. And so so this notion of the desert as being a place of demons becomes something that becomes shall we say, what am I thinking? A painting that you can paint a lot of language upon. And so, for instance, we get to Isaiah 13 and 34 are some classic passages where, like, for example, Isaiah 13 is talking about the judgment of Babylon, and it talks about in 13:21 through 22, Babylon will be judged, and he's mocking Babylon. He's saying the wild animals will lie down there. In their houses will be full of howling creatures. Ostriches, wild goats will dance. Hyenas will cry in its towers, and jackals in the pleasant places. And so it's talking about this, like, you're going to be judged, and you're going to be like the desert, and all these wild animals are going to be, howling over you. Well, that's what it looks like in some bad English translations. But if you look at the Septuagint, if you look in the original language, you start to see there's a lot of demonic creatures that these actually are. And we've mentioned some of these before, but just to kind of go back over one of them, you guys can talk about the rest. But one of them is the wild animals and the hyenas. Sometimes this translated wild beasts, but those two words are siyim and iyim. And what's interesting about those, they show up also in Isaiah 34, and they show up in Jeremiah 50. The wild beasts shall dwell with the hyenas in Babylon. And it's interesting because those words are actually words that some scholars argue are the equivalent of ghosts and goblins. And for instance, Wildeberger, in his commentary on Isaiah, he talks about how some of those animals are zoologically identifiable, but some of them aren't. Particularly, he says these siyim, which are demons, and the kind that do mischief by the ruins of Babylon, according to Isaiah, they are mentioned along with the iyim, goblins, in the passage. So there's some scholarship that brings out that these creatures are it's talking about these demons in the desert are mocking you. So all this package together of the desert, the demons, of course, that's going to lead to Azazel, which we can talk about later. But so that's there's a starter for you. I know there's a lot we can talk about there.
Well, Isaiah 13:21, the wild goats, the Seirim. This was, there's debate among scholars as to whether those were divine beings or not, but it certainly appears to be in the Septuagint, because wild goats is translated as divine beings, unless those are the donkey centaurs of verse 22. But verse 22, are those the hyenas, the jackals? The translators into English say we really don't know what the Hebrew words mean. So if we're looking at the Septuagint, we get at least some guidance as to what Jewish religious scholars 2,000 years ago thought about this. But we know that there was a condemnation of the Israelites for sacrificing to goat demons in the desert. Again, the desert. This was Leviticus
17:7
chapter.
Leviticus 17:7
chapter. Yeah. So
and 2 Chronicles 11:15.
Yeah, they will sacrifice their sacrifice. No more sacrifice their sacrifices to goat demons after whom they whore. And the Septuagint rendering there was sacrifice their sacrifices to the pointless beings. Septuagint translators kind of wimped out on that one. But goat demons, well, Azazel, Jed, I know that you've done some research on that. Is this connected to Azazel somehow? Given that Leviticus 18 follows that, and or Leviticus 19 rather. Am I forgetting where the Azazel chapter was? Yes, I am.
That is Leviticus 16.
16. Yeah. Okay, so it
16.
follows the Azazel chapter. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think there has to be. I think it's all part. The if you'll pardon the pun, the panoply of gods, goat gods, that exists. Going back into antiquity and arguably into prehistory. The people of ancient Israel, the ancient Hebrews, are literally surrounded by peoples that worship some form of goat deity. In my book Paneas, there's a chapter in there called Pan and Many Faces, where I talk about specifically about Paneas, but by extension, you've literally got every geographical locale in the vicinity that worships some sort of goat deity. The Assyrians worshipped a goat demon known as Ben, or at least placated one called Benu. Zaga was an Amorite goat deity, and of course Maru himself was associated with shepherds. The various Adzes and Uds, lesser goat deities, were worshipped all throughout the Levant. So, and of course, the Hebrews classified these collectively as Sherim. And you referenced the Septuagint a moment ago. In a lot of cases, the Septuagint is a clarifying lens. In some cases, as we saw in just previously, the translators may have dropped the ball a little bit, but I think clarification in the form of Seder is pretty clear what is meant by this. And I've long, this is a sort of footnote to this discussion, but I've long held that because of Orientalizing, as in the case with so many of the Greco-Roman gods, these kind of goat deities that show up later as Pan and Faunus and Autumnus and Februarius and other places in the Greco-Roman world they originate in this region. So yes, there's a profusion of these deities, and I think that they do go back to Azazel. I think that there's a kind of lineage between Azazel all the way down to Pan. especially given the fact that in the wake of Alexander's conquest of the region, the Ptolemies and then the Seleucids, after they defeated the Ptolemies, established the Paneon at Paneas at the foot of Mount Hermon. Undoubtedly did so because of the already extant worship of goat deities and goat demons in the region, and looking at this through the theopolitical lens, as Sharon would say, Derek, I think that yes, we have to see that this parade of goat deities through the ages that are referenced in Old Testament scripture harken back to Azazel.
Would that have been connected to the reference Brian gave us earlier, 2 Chronicles 11:15? You've got the goat idols that were set up by Jeroboam. I mean, we've all heard of the golden calves that he set up at Dan and at Bethel, but according to 2 Chronicles, he appointed his own priests for the high places and for the goat idols, the serim, and for the calves that he had made. I think that's really interesting because Paneas, Banyas, the Grotto of Pan, is at the base of Mount Hermon. And I think the golden calves were a representation of Bull El. In fact, the fellow who set up the Naphtali Tur Sinai, who set up the School of Hebrew Language, the Institute of Hebrew Language in like 1952 in Jerusalem, said that Hosea 8:6, the consonants should be regrouped so that instead of saying, "For it is from Israel," talking about the golden calf that Jeroboam had set up, it should read, "For it is Bull El," or "For who is Bull El? A craftsman made it, it is not God." Because the words "it is" are not in the Hebrew text. So if that's correct, El's tabernacle or abode was the summit of Mount Hermon, and Azazel or Pan was at the base of Mount Hermon. Was Jeroboam setting up a religion that was focused around Mount Hermon?
Well, remember that Tel Dan is only a mile or two from.
Yeah, it's only
Paneas.
a couple of miles to the west across the valley. Yeah.
Right.
And
right.
this is where it all comes together in First Enoch. So we're talking about Azazel, Azazel. I don't know. I like Azazel. That sounds cool too.
What's
I'll do
the
that.
cat in the Smurfs?
Azazel. Okay, I'll say Azazel. I'll be consistent.
I
with
know
you
that
guys.
was Osriel. Osriel was the cat.
That's real. That's what it is.
Oh, Azrael.
Close
So
enough.
First
Cats
Enoch
are evil.
10:4. Yeah, absolutely. Amen. So who is this Azazel that we're talking about? And of course, he's one of the lead angels or the lead sons of God that fall, and it's talked about in First Enoch. And just a couple verses to show how these are all connected to what we've been talking about. First Enoch 10:4. The Lord says to Raphael, the archangel, and this is, Enoch is recording this, bind Azazel hand and foot. This is after they fell and mated with the humans and bore the giants, and they're going to be judged. So he says, bind Azazel hand and foot and throw him into the darkness. And he made a hole in the desert, which was in Judea, and cast him there. So where's Judea? We don't know, but for sure. But First Enoch 13 says, this is Enoch now, and he's talking to Enoch. As for Enoch, he proceeded and said to Azazel, there will not be peace unto you. A grave judgment has come upon you. They will put you in bonds, and you will not have an opportunity, etc., etc. And then Enoch says, I went and sat down upon the waters of Dan, in Dan, which is on the southwest of Hermon. And I read the memorial papers. This is where he talks about the judgment of the watchers and how they're pleading for mercy, right? So this is sort of the ancient connection of everything we're talking about.
Yeah, we got to go to the two waters of Dan, Derek.
We did
there.
the waters of Dan, and then later in 1 Enoch 13 verse 9, when I awakened, I came unto them. These are the watchers, and they were all sitting gathered together, weeping. In this translation, which is R.H. Charles, it looks like Abel's jail. The older translation reads like Abel Main, But the Hebrew, according to George Nicholsburg, is probably, Avel Maim, which means waters of weeping. And I'm forgetting his name now, Edward Lipinski, who wrote the paper, The Abode of El, about Mount Hermon and how it was the abode of El, mentioned almost in passing that those waters of weeping were probably that nature preserve that we visited near the town of Metula. So we visited two of the sites mentioned here.
I mean, that's only maybe 4 miles probably to the west of where Teldan is, if that. So all very close together.
It's a stream coming down from Lebanon. It goes down in a waterfall and joins the Jordan River with the waters that come from Dan to form the Jordan River. But according to Lipinski, these geographic locations actually exist, and they're all in that Upper Galilee region, which we talked about previously as being supernaturally charged. Dudael, the Jews actually have a tradition that there's a mountain east of Jerusalem towards the Dead Sea, which I'm going to forget the name of the mountain now, but they call it Mount Azazel because it's due east of Jerusalem. Munhir? No, that's not it. I'll remember it and I'll put it in the show notes later. But anyway, Aaron Lipkin took us there when we were there in May. And all you can find leading up to that place, because the road is, you definitely need like a Land Rover to get there, or a Toyota, Land Cruiser, which Aaron has. But even then, it was a rough ride to get up there. But all you could see on the way up there were Bedouins herding goats, because those are the only people who could make it up there. And the belief was that was the mountain where they would take the goats that had the sins of the people put on them and drove them off the cliff, because it was like a sheer drop that led, and again, it overlooks the Dead Sea.
I have a note in the giant book that Dudael very well could be Mount Hermon, and that note says Burton interview, page 17.
I remember that.
Well, this circles back then to the Azazel passage in Leviticus 16. What's going on there? It's the high priest is supposed to bring 2 goats and places his hand on one, and the sins go on him, and that's for the Lord. And then he places his hands on the other goat, and that's for Azazel, and he shall be presented. So they kill the one goat for the Lord, but then the Azazel one they keep alive, and it says, keep alive before the Lord to make atonement for it, and that it may be sent away into the wilderness to Azazel. And so the question becomes, wait, are they saying there's a sacrificing to Yahweh and sacrificing to this demon? No. The idea is, if the wilderness is the place of chaos, and the wilderness represents, as we've always said, that the chaos out of which God creates his order, just like the sea, same thing, same concept there. But, God creates his order out of that desert chaos. So his covenant order is in contrast to that chaos. Well, when it comes to the sins, where do sins belong? Sins belong out in the chaos, away from the God's covenanted order. And so I think it's, what it's saying there is, it's not that it's a sacrifice for a demon god or something, but it's saying, look, that Azazel, that watcher, that evil watcher, he actually is imprisoned in the desert. So we're going to send our sins out to that desert of chaos where Azazel is. And it's sort of I guess a multi-layered way of describing your sins being completely, cut off from your reality.
This connection between the demonic realm and the desert, a couple of things here, and I'll get to the other one in a minute, which relates to where Moses got his only look at the Holy Land. But this puts the prophecy in Isaiah chapter 40 of the coming of John the Baptist, because in all 4 Gospels, this particular verse is quoted in relation to John the Baptist. But I always heard it in the New Testament, a voice crying in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord, or something to that effect. But the ESV renders Isaiah 40 verse 3 this way, a voice cries, in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. So prepare the way of the Lord. Now, the Septuagint, this is probably why it's rendered differently in the New Testament, because the Septuagint renders it this way: the voice of one calling in the desert, prepare the way of the Lord, make the paths of our God straight. But the other rendering, in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. That kind of gives it a different spin. It's like, let's go into the enemy territory.
Much the geography that Luke focuses on in the way that he writes his gospel, especially more than the other four, that Jesus is hanging out in Galilee doing everything, and not just in Galilee, but above Galilee, in this whole area, which is the wilderness. So if his whole purpose is to come and make straight in the wilderness, and where else would he do it? Well, he would do it there. And that's exactly what we find him doing.
The other aspect of this was the translation of the word Abarim, which is rendered traveler. There's a cognate term in Ugaritic that was applied to the Rephaim. They were called travelers, as in those who traveled from one plane of existence to the other. But 100 years ago, there was a Bible dictionary, and can't remember the name of it. But anyway, they rendered the term Abarim, which was the name given to Mount Nebo by God when he said, I want you to climb this mountain of Abarim, Abarim, this mountain of travelers, to get his only look at the Holy Land. And the Bible dictionary translated it as meaning those on the other side. But they saw it in the context of those on the other side of the Jordan River. The mountains of Moab east of the Dead Sea were those mountains on the other side. And it struck me as odd. I mean, they almost had it right, because this was before the discovery of the Ugaritic text, so they did not know there was a cognate that had applied to the spirits of the Rephaim in a language very similar to Hebrew. But yeah, in a sense it was. It does mean those on the other side of the veil. And in fact, Ezekiel refers to the war of Gog and Magog concluding in the valley of the travelers, or the valley of the Rephaim, if you will, east of the sea, east of the Dead Sea. So again, that area, that desert area east of the Dead Sea, known to Ezekiel apparently as connected somehow to these demonic spirits.
Jed, I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about a particular entity. Derek said he was kind of surprised that vampires came up, and in the Isaiah 34:14 verse, the last in the list in that verse is so weird to me that the ESV translates it as a night owl, or a night bird, or a screech owl. Now that's related to what I think she is, but it's just strange, the naturalism of it. You get in some of the other translations, night monster, night hags. The Vulgate translates as vampire. The Septuagint calls it onokentauros, which they translate into English as a satyr, so a donkey satyr. But then that's the actual satyr, which usually is a goat satyr. But the Hebrew word is Lilith. And so it's like, what in the world? So really only the Jewish Tanakh actually translates it as the Lilith. And to kind of set you up just the tiniest bit, and Brian too, you wrote whole chapters on Lilith that are just fantastic in your novels. There's a portion of the Aaronic blessing in the Targum that says, may the Lord bless you in all your deeds and protect you from the Lilith and the demons of the night. And one more little aspect to it that I think is kind of interesting, just in terms of hiding the translations. Another demon in the Proverbs that I came across, a thing called an Aluka.
The Aluka,
yes. The Proverbs 30:15. The leech has two daughters, give and give. Three things are never satisfied, four never say enough. Sheol, the barren womb, the land never stays satisfied with water, and the fire that never says enough. Well, the DDD, Dictionary of Deities and Demons in the Bible, tells us that the Aluka, that's what it's translated as a leech, is actually a vampiric creature. And then the very next verse where it gives us Sheol, the barren womb, the land never satisfied. Well, these are Hades, the wife of Eros, which is Psyche, Tartarus, and Gaia. And so these are actually the primordial deities, and the whole idea seems to be, and the ESV gives those the Septuagint gives those translations.
What's the
Certainly
verse?
not the ESV.
What's the verse you're
That's
talking about?
Proverbs 30, verse 15, and then the next verse 16.
Got it.
And
That's cool.
And so the whole idea there seems to be that there's this wicked generation of people that are like these demons and fallen gods that are never satisfied and always do evil. And one of them is this vampiric creature, and then you've got the Lilith that's talked about. So I'd just love to hear you guys talk a little bit about her and her mythology. Why would she show up in a place of demons? What's the relationship with the owl? Why would somebody translate that as an owl? Those kinds of questions.
Well, the Lilith, Lilitu, Lilu, the variations on a theme can be found all throughout Mesopotamia and the ancient Near East. But there are even variations on this in the Greco-Roman world. The Sirens and the Lamia, even the Roman Strix, they all have these human female characteristics, and then they typically have talons. Usually the talons of an owl or some sort of night bird, but they're all flesh eaters. They're all blood drinkers, and there she is, smack dab in the middle of Isaiah. There's hardly an instance when this topic comes up that I'm talking about it, and somebody doesn't raise an eyebrow about it. On some thread about, come on, vampires in the Bible, but you really have to, as I've said any number of times, and to my students who take my vampirology classes, you really have to strip the cinematic and literary vampire. You need to knock the plastic fangs out of the vampire's mouth to get down to the actual demonic character. And when you apply the biblical lens, biblical scrutiny to this is the picture that you get. And the Lilu, the Lilith, is a creature, a demon that's preserved throughout ancient Near Eastern and Mediterranean tradition. The Aluka is Doug, that you mentioned, is also very interesting, not just because of that description in the Proverbs. Most of the lore of the ancient Near East describes the Aluka, or varieties of it, as also a shape-shifting vampire. So it can take on the attributes of other animals as well. It's interesting on a linguistic note that morpheme in the middle of Aluka, the LK rendering, is the same. It shows up again in the name of the Amalekites, these descendants of Esau, who are described as the blood drinkers or blood lickers. Again, another one of these peripheral cultures associated with demonic behavior, demonic activity. So, yeah, they're there.
Yeah.
There's really not much that convention wants to do with them, other than turn them into colorful literary devices. But the fact of the matter is that if you look at them through the lens of the Bible, you get a pretty clear picture of demonic activity. And I would posit further, and I think that we'd probably all be in agreement, is no matter what sort of folkloric creature with these kind of malevolent bent, certainly the bloodthirsty variety, we could trace those back to demonic roots and indeed pre-flood roots. In his very excellent work on the subject, Montague Summers talks about in the prefatory remarks of the vampires kith and kin, that these spirits, these vampiric spirits, are amongst those Nephilim spirits that were destroyed in the flood. And he connects these to those passages in the Book of the Watchers in the first part of Enoch, and their judgment, that they would be unclean spirits on the earth, and they would be forever hampering mankind and forever thirsty and hungry and never able to sate those physical desires. So
Wow. I mean, that's
those,
literally what the proverb says.
yes, exactly.
Yeah. And I mean, it would make sense because if you think about it, the life is in the blood. That was the belief in the ancient world, and
Sure.
certainly in the Hebrew mindset. And so the idea of these demons taking the life out of you, and so it would make sense of sucking their blood. But also, Lilith has the ancient Mesopotamian notion was that she was this night demon that would come and steal the life of your infants or your children. And then the Jews sort of took that and then they expanded it into also a whole mythology that was the belief that Lilith was actually Adam's first wife, who, in good feminist fashion, was rejected, and then he married a new wife, Eve, right? And so then Lilith then has this vengeful pursuit of taking women's infants, and that's the expansion of it. But it's interesting because the ancient Mesopotamian mythology also had Lilith connected to this tree with this serpent around it called Ningith-Shida. And then there was this Anzu bird up in the branches, and that's kind of there's a whole poetry about that. And this Isaiah 34 verse, it's kind of confusing because there's different translations pick up different aspects of it. But the NASB talks about the night monster will settle there, find her resting place. But then it actually translates what others are saying as a satyr. It translates that word kippos as the tree snake will make its nest and lay eggs there and will hatch them, rather than an owl. And that's interesting because that connects the Lilith with this tree snake of Ningith-Shida. And so there might be some interplay going on there with that whole mythology. What's the point though? And I think it's just, this is the cognitive environment that they live in, and they're interpreting whatever the myths or mythology is around them, whether it's Lilith or satyrs or whatever. They're interpreting them as demonic. Does this mean they believe in the Mesopotamian mythology? No, it doesn't necessarily mean that. I don't think. But it's certainly they're using that language because that's how people do believe, and they're just saying this is demonic. This is demons.
I brought this passage up. I think last time we talked about this. I think we've only talked about it one time, but just for those who might be struggling with translating into the supernatural, we do have an inspired commentary in the book of Revelation on this passage in Revelation 18, and this is the fall of Babylon, and he hears the mighty voice say, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, and a haunt for every unclean and detestable beast." Well, when you look at these two passages in Isaiah 34 and 21, that's what you have. You have unclean birds, you have unclean and beasts, and you have literally the word demon being used in the Septuagint, and then you have unclean spirits, of which Lilith would be one example. So, John is very much interpreting this passage the way that we're talking about. And for the life of me, I don't understand why John is not allowed to at least have a say in how we translate these passages in Isaiah.
That's really good, and I'm going to steal that because we're just coming up to Revelation 18 in our Unraveling Revelation series. So we'll give you credit.
We know that this is going on because as Brian said earlier, the Isaiah 13 is literally an oracle against Babylon. Yeah. Now, Isaiah 34 is against Edom, but they're parallel passages, so it doesn't really matter. In saying Babylon, that's what he's getting it from. Just straight up taking it from Isaiah.
Yep.
Here's
which
another
John
interesting,
does all the time with the Old Testament. So
another interesting thought, and this might be going out on the limb and songing off behind me, but the word in the Old Testament, the word in Hebrew for Babylon, is the same exact word used for Babel. So given that Isaiah was writing 125 years or so before Babylon became 100 years before Babylon became a power. At that time, Babylon was a vassal state of Assyria. Was he seeing a century into the future? And I'm okay with that interpretation, but was he also proclaiming desolation on Bab-el, the God Gate, and those entities that came through it? Speculation. I know that there aren't any, but it's like anything else. When you see the name like Ashur in the Old Testament, does it mean the capital city of Assyria? Does it mean the Assyrian nation, or is it the god Ashur, who was the equivalent of Enlil and El and Molech? Don't know. Context is king, and like I said, I fully acknowledge I may be going out too far on that limb. But interesting to think about. There's a verse that a lot of people use, or one of the Psalms that people will use as a comfort when they're going through difficult times. Psalm 91, which is kind of a warrior psalm. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. But verses 11, 12, and 13, 11 and 12 were actually taken out of context and used against Jesus by Satan. For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. On their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone. And of course he threw it back on Satan, at Satan. But verses 3 through 6, there are some entities that in English are translated as pestilence, terror, and destruction that are mentioned in the DDD as entities. Pestilence being dever, terror being pakad, and destruction being Ketev, and all three of those being acknowledged as names of entities, at least to the pagans around ancient Israel.
I actually ended the giant book on the Psalm 91, and I gave it my own translation based on the DDD entries. Maybe I should just read it.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, in fact, a woman in our church has posted this online the other day, and so we said, "Where'd you get that from?" And she said, "Well, it's the very end of the giant book." So this is my translation of all these weird things. Remember, this is the psalm that Satan is quoting Jesus
Right
at the temptation, and you'll hear that near the end of it. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High God will abide in the shadow of Shaddai, God of the mountain, God of the wilderness.
Right.
He will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my Elohim in whom I trust. For he will deliver you from the snare of the fowler and from the deadly pestilence. He shall overshadow you with his wings. His truth shall cover you with a shield. You shall not fear the night demon, nor the arrow-shooting Lilith who shoots her arrows in the day, nor the diseased ghost that walks in darkness, nor the noonday demon. 1,000 shall fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. You will only look with your eyes and see the recompense of the wicked. Because you have made the Lord your dwelling place, Elyon, the Most High, who is my refuge, no evil shall be allowed to befall you, no plague shall come near your tent. For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. On their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against the stone. You will tread on the lion-headed demons. You shall trample the lion and the dragon. Because he holds fast to me in love, I will deliver him. I will protect him because he knows my name. When he calls to me, I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will rescue him and honor him. With long life, I will satisfy him and show him my salvation.
Amen.
And we should point out that salvation in the Old Testament is Yeshua.
Didn't even think about that.
Zev Porat pointed that out to us at Shiloh when we were there with him back in 2019, the prayer of Hannah. And it's, when you read the Old Testament, just whenever you see the word salvation, just double check, and because usually it is Yeshua. No, that is really good. That entity, pestilence, Dever, was known 1,000 years before the Exodus at Ebla in northern Syria. Dever was, according to Petnato, the archaeologist who did a lot of the work there, I think it was Petnato. anyway, whoever wrote the book on the original dig there in the discoveries, Dever was the patron deity of the city. So the pestilence god was the patron deity. The chief of the pantheon was Dagon, whose epithet was Lord of the Corpse, and 1/4 of the city was devoted to Resheph, who was the plague god. And we see Resheph and Dever mentioned in Habakkuk 3:5. So where they're described as following at the Lord's heels as he marches forth from Sinai, from Timon, leading his people to the Promised Land, which is interesting because it gives you this mental image that these evil spirits are like whipped puppies that have to follow behind the master.
I think it's just crazy fascinating that Satan uses this of all the Psalms to quote to Jesus.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because this is the most supernatural psalm in the Psalter. And what is Satan? You know, what is the devil? I mean, he's the supernatural entity par excellence. It's almost as if Satan is tempting Jesus with the truth that God will protect you from me. Which puts it on a crazy spin. Like, look, that's what the Psalm says. He'll protect you from me. All you have to do. And then, you know, it's like, wow, the cunning guile of this creature knows no bounds.
But it is astonishing that even in the Old Testament, there was an understanding by the priests that these entities were a real thing and that the people needed to be protected from them. I mean, you know, Psalm 91, what is that, 3,000 years old? And it's in there. It's just been translated out because of as we discussed on previous programs, sort of an anti-supernatural bias on the part of translators.
Well, and I brought that up with the Aaronic blessing as well, that the whole Targum has almost doubles the length of the blessing, saying, may the Lord protect you from these supernatural entities. Like, why would they do that? You don't get any hint of that when you just read the blessing itself, but for some reason, the Targumist decided that he wanted to add that to it. It had to have been some sort of a tradition that he was passing down.
What is curious, and I'll just throw this out, and maybe we can wrap up just to ponder this question. We know from Mesopotamian texts, Akkadian, Sumerian, Ugaritic, that there were texts that were intended to give priests or shamans the power to exorcise people who'd been possessed by these evil spirits. But we don't see that in the Old Testament. We don't see any of the prophets casting demons out of the Israelites. But in the New Testament, that's a major focus of the ministry of Jesus and the apostles. What changed between the Old Testament and the New Testament? Why did the ancient Israelites why don't we see that in the Old Testament and we do in the New?
You know, thought just popped into my head. I'm curious what you guys think, that what we have is most of the Old Testament is pre-exilic. So they go into exile, into Babylon, and we know the Babylonians were casting out demons all the time. They had ritual spells and incantations and bowls and books and the whole deal. And maybe they picked up the practice from that pagan culture and then brought it back. And then we only have a couple of books after the exile in the Old Testament, and they're not really focused on this anyway. So I don't know. Maybe that has something to do with it.
Possible, but as far back as Moses, God was telling the Israelites, don't pass your children through the fire to Molech. So they were certainly.
No, I'm not saying that there wasn't worship of the gods or whatever, but I'm saying that the specific idea of casting out or exorcising demons could have been something that they got from them. I don't know.
Oh, okay. The practice of it. Okay.
Well, I've always sort of, I've seen that what's happening there as being an expression of, Jesus is the son of David, and David was the original anointed Messiah to, rescue Israel. And what did he do? He got rid of the last of the Rephaim that were in the land, and he wiped them out. because Joshua did not. Joshua killed all of them except the some that were left in Philistia, and Philistia was who David was fighting, and Goliath and all that. And so David wiped out the last of the Rephaim in his day as King David. And so, but as we've always said all along, the Nephilim, or the demons, are actually, we believe, the spirits of the dead Nephilim, who are part of the Rephaim, Anakim, all that package of the concept of the underworld entities and deities and such. And so if demons are the spirits of the dead Nephilim, and Messiah comes into the Holy Land, what does he do? What is he coming to do? He's coming to finalize what David began but did not finish, and that was cleansing the land for him to reign as king. And what would that cleansing be? But in the spiritual realm, certainly, because Jesus was obviously not a military, conqueror, but he was a spiritual warrior. That was that whole component that those Jews missed. But part of that spiritual warrior was then him casting those Nephilim spirits that was expressive of the son of David getting rid of the Rephaim in the land for his rule to be established, for his kingdom to be established. That's kind of how I've seen it. That's how I've at least found a way to express all these components together with the fact that there was demon possession and casting out wasn't really a big thing until then. All of a sudden, there's all this activity. Why? Well, the spirits of the dead Nephilim would be, when they see, oh my gosh, the son of David is coming to finalize everything, with his kingdom, establishment of his kingdom or whatever. That would make sense to me, at least theologically.
So I 100% agree with that, Brian. I wonder if there could be like multiple things going on at the same time.
Oh, sure.
And what just popped into my head was the Testament of Solomon. Because of all the pseudepigrapha, this is the weirdest, and it's got the closest analogies to the casting out of demons. So I started looking here at Charlesworth's introduction to the book, and they date the Testament between the 1st and 3rd centuries AD, so contemporary with New Testament, but also going into the writing of the Talmud. And as they're talking about the provenance, is what they say, equally difficult to establish as its provenance, or in other words, where was it written? Like most Hellenistic Jewish magic, the Testament has an international quality. Certain elements suggest Babylonia. Oh, that's interesting. The ascription of ailments and diseases to specific demons was deeply rooted there, and so was the wind demon, which causes fever. There's also connections with the Babylonian Talmud. For example, the demons assisting Solomon's temple building, or the lengthy treatment of the legend of Ashmedai. And then it goes on and continues talking about the bowls and from Babylon and stuff like that. So, if these people brought back something that maybe they weren't supposed to bring back into the land, that could have exacerbated the whole problem that you just brought up with the Nephilim. Anyway, I mean, we kind of started off the show talking about these ritual pits, right? And what if there was just all kinds of magic and things going on that they should not have been doing that was making the problem worse than it was before, or in a different way or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah,
there's some scholarship to support that. There are any number of scholars who have posited over the years that, and you referenced specifically Asmodeus, is mentioned in Avestan literature in Zoroastrian tradition. So it's entirely possible that they did bring some of those practices back with them, or at least some of those ideas back with them, and that contributed to the not only the increase but the diversity of demonic activity in the Holy Land they're developing in the interbiblical period.
I think Glory and Grace are telling me
and
that
dogs.
time's up.
And
Yeah. Well, they are here to protect us from whatever threats seen and unseen. Raccoons, no problem. Ghosts may take a little longer. Demons, but it may be all night. That could explain all the barking that went on last night from like 3 a.m. onward. Anyway, it is fascinating. I just want to mention one other thing, that there was the evil spirit, or the harmful spirit from the Lord that tormented Saul in 1 Samuel 16, which may be the closest thing we've got to an example of demonic oppression anyway, if not possession. But yeah, something
but
certainly
still strangely unique.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and why was it that David's playing of the lyre was able to soothe Saul's spirit when he was being tormented? Unknown.
Remember, Psalm 91 would not have been just read like we did. They would have sung it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Huh. Well, I look forward to that day when we get access to the full archive in the new Jerusalem. I'm applying for a job. Sharon and I both, we've decided we're going for jobs there first day. But I think the bottom line, and I hope this is taken as encouragement from for those who see or hear this, is that when we see things like Psalm 91 and realize that there's more supernaturally going on in there than we've probably been taught, there's also the encouragement for 10,000, when they're saying 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but will not come near you. It's not necessarily talking about the enemy army, at least not the human enemy army. It's also talking about the supernatural, and that is encouraging. Brian Godawa, Doug Van Dorn, Dr. Judd Burton, thanks again for another fascinating discussion, and look forward to Iron and Myth 33 next month. And thank you again for taking time out to join me on this call. Check the notes below this video or audio, wherever you're consuming this particular podcast, for links to the websites for Brian Godawa, Doug Van Dorn, and Dr. Judd Burton. And they'll be back again next month with another Iron and Myth. That'll be episode number 33. Yeah, we're looking forward to that one. We're going to talk about Mount Hermon. Or Hermon, I just looked up the pronunciation. Mount Hermon next month on Iron and Myth. Coming up, got a new conference to tell you about at which I will not be speaking, but my best friend is. That would be Sharon K. Gilbert. That and, apparently doctors in the UK can't tell the difference between men and women. I'm not quite sure about this new National Health Service directive. Bless their pointy little heads. View from the Bunker continues straight ahead.
The 10 plagues of Moses and the Exodus were judgment upon the gods of Egypt, because those gods were demonic reality. Chronicles of the Watchers is a series of biblical novels by best-selling author Brian Godawa, charting the influence of spiritual warfare on human history. The War of Gods and Men. A must-read. Moses Against the Gods of Egypt and Other Supernatural Historical Novels in the series Chronicles of the Watchers. Available in ebook, paperback, and audiobook at Amazon.com. That's Chronicles of the Watchers by Brian Godawa at Amazon.com.
Archaeologists call it the world's oldest temple, Göbekli Tepe. But who were the guardians of Göbekli?
I love that title. In fact, it's the title of Dr. Aaron Judkin's book, and he gets into that information. He is one of the world experts on Göbekli Tepe. There aren't very many of them.
There aren't, and he's one of the few who will take a Christian look at Göbekli Tepe and try to analyze the spiritual forces behind this mysterious site. Why did our Stone Age ancestors spend so much time building this specifically for ritual purposes?
And then burying it.
It
is a message in stone, and I tell you what, hundreds of archaeologists and experts have been trying to decipher this for a long time. I think Aaron may be onto something.
Right. This is a 60-minute conversation that Aaron and I had about Göbekli Tepe. You can get it now at our special introductory price, 20% off. But this special offer is only available at our online store. What lies beneath? 20% off now at gilberthouse.org/store. Driving the internet to think every Sunday night from the beautiful Missouri Ozarks. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. We're online at VFTB.net. Elsewhere on the web, gilberthouse.org. That's where we find you will find all of the stuff that Sharon and I do. DerekPGilbert.com, my personal website. On social media, you'll find us on X, formerly Twitter, at View from Bunker, at Derek Gilbert, at GilbertHouse_TV. And the other social media sites, Truth Social, Gab Me We Get Her at Derek P. Gilbert. On YouTube at Gilbert House. And please click that bell for notifications, hit the like button, and then please, if you don't mind, download our app, which guarantees we never get canceled. You'll find our app for iOS, Android, Amazon, Kindle, Fire phones, and tablets at gilberthouse.org/app. That's gilberthouse.org/app. Joining me now on the program is the co-host or co-owner? I don't know if owner is the right word, Jeannie, of Hear the Watchman Ministries, co-servant, perhaps, of Hear the Watchman Ministries. There's an event coming up in October that's featuring my best friend, but alongside a number of other remarkable women in a virtual seminar called Inspiring Women. Jeannie, when will this take place, and what was the inspiration for putting together this event?
Well, as you know, we were on a different track before a few interesting events occurred. Things are moving so fast, and I think women in particular are very sensitive to what's going on in the world. I'm talking like vibrationally, politically, spiritually. I just think that we have a unique sense of feeling these things. And I think so many women that I've talked to are immobilized by fear right now. And now of all times, with all these changes that we're hearing about, all this buzz, call it a movie, call it, World War, call it, political craziness, Trump's assassination attempt. There's so much tension. And we all know that if we do not activate what God has brought us on this planet to do and take action, then we could have a very different outcome, because we're to occupy before we come. And it's not just a job for the men. So I think culturally, a lot of women feel that they're to support the man and sit back. And I think we also are wired to worry, which is not a good thing. So the bottom line with all of this is there's so many women that I've been inspired by, and dogs too.
Yeah, Grace is alerting. Apparently, our mailman is here with the daily delivery. Her mortal enemies: the mailman, the Amazon delivery truck, UPS, FedEx. She is right on it, letting us know that there's another delivery out there. Yeah, I think you're right. These are really unprecedented political times in the United States. We're seeing one party actually arguing that we need to censor speech because free speech is dangerous, because some of it should just not be allowed, which really is actually 180 degrees opposed to what the framers of the Constitution instilled as the First Amendment to the Bill of Rights. And they, in fact, are the ones stoking fear. They are stoking such fear in about half the country that they're actually going along with this anti-American ideal. We're not helping things if we are succumbing to a spirit of fear, which Scripture clearly tells us is not from God. We men, we want to fix the problem. We want to go out and do things. And as Christian men, that can be a challenge too, because our weapons in this war are not in the natural. They are prayer, fasting when called for, that kind of thing. But as you say, what is the role of a woman, a scriptural woman? What is the role of a godly Christian woman in these times? I'm sure that Sharon is going to bring something wise. I lean on her for counsel all the time, but you've got a remarkable lineup of women set to present for this virtual webinar. Who else is on the list, and why did you invite those women?
I mean, it's completely selfish. My reasoning for inviting these women are because they are incredible women to me, and they've inspired me. I look up to them. I see how they take action. They write their books. They share their testimony. They'll do a podcast. They'll speak at a school council meeting and speak up and speak out and be bold. So these are bold women, or they'll talk about spiritual warfare and they'll share deep, dark things that most people won't talk about. And so to me, this lineup are women that have inspired me and inspired so many, but they're still unknown to the majority of our population, right? I mean, these are superstars in our little world, in our little remnant world, but I want to share them with the world. And so including your wife, of course, Sharon is amazing. She's an overcomer. And I've noticed that every single woman on my list has had some huge overcoming incident or a set of circumstances that seem impossible. But through faith, they have overcome, and they have turned what was very painful into something they're completely passionate about. And I think that, and I believe, and I know I can speak for myself, that when I'm in a mode of creativity and passion for the Lord, and I say, use me, use my gifts, help me be bold. Lord, give me the strength and give me the focus to carry out what you will have for me. Then we don't have to worry about all that garbage out there, that we just do our part. And I'm doing this conference because I think that women will walk away after listening to these women, and there's more to come, by the way. I'm adding a few more, but that'll be a surprise. When they hear the testimonies and they hear how these are ordinary women doing extraordinary things and no different from all the listeners and anyone who's in a rut. I think a lot of people are in a rut, and a lot of women are in a rut. They will ignite their husbands if they get out of a rut. So I've been asked for a long time, what about the women? Jeannie, you do all these conferences and 99% of the speakers are men. Well, men are, tend to be our strength and our leaders traditionally. And yet women play a big role. And I want to lift women up, because behind every great man is a great woman. And women were brought on this planet for a purpose. I want to see more Esthers out there. And I want to be more of an Esther. And so, these women who I talk to these women on the phone occasionally. I follow them online. I listen to your wife. I listen to, for example, Tracy Tennant does our Tuesday night spiritual warfare training Tuesday, and she teaches on spiritual warfare, which, 5 years ago, no one even used that terminology. And we brought Russ Dizdar into our family, and and to me, I was like, nobody is really just focusing on this. It needs to be focused on. So now women are coming out and sharing their stories. They're more vulnerable in many cases regarding spiritual warfare. And I don't know why that is, but they tend to be more vulnerable. And so there's that. So Vicki Joy Anderson is amazing. Heidi Begley. Oh my gosh, that woman is amazing. She's been through so much and done so much. Lisa Keys is a warrior in her own right. She does counseling and deliverance like you would not believe. Leslie Johnson, Stan Johnson's wife. They have been working since the 90s, and she's written several books, just like your wife, Sharon, to inspire women, to activate women. Jen Crate, my dear, dear friend, is the most amazing prayer warrior. I have been on the phone with her and have been physically healed just praying with her in real time. So, we have these, God has superpowers that he's given all women and all men, but I wanted to focus on women one time, at least, because I think women are different, and they need a different type of nudge. So this is centered for women, and it is online. Travel is a little tricky right now for a lot of people, both financially and just concerns about world affairs. So we just decided, no, we're going to do it online, but we're adding an element which is very exciting. We're going to invite the speakers to come in on Sunday for like a 20-minute segment, and people can watch the webinars on Friday, Saturday. They can watch them anytime, actually, but with the idea that if they watch them, they can write down their questions, and then they have the privilege of interacting. We'll have an interactive Zoom, and we'll bring in speakers every 20 minutes to answer questions about what they presented. And so it's a little more, because I know that so many times I'll watch something on a screen, but if it's a live event, you can talk to people about it. You can get your questions answered. So we're going to combine the two. And I'm just very excited to inspire women and to teach women how to take what's painful for them and turn it into something powerful. And they can be passionate about it, and they can focus on taking action that will really make a difference in this world. If each one of us turns our pain into passion, this world will be a better place, for sure.
Amen to that. The enemy tries to use that pain to turn us against God, and all too often that is a trap that people fall into. But the Lord can reveal himself in the depths of our despair, in the midst of our pain and sorrow, and bring us out much stronger on the other side, just as Moses coming out the other side of the wilderness was stronger. All of us have a wilderness experience at least once in our lives. The weekend for the Inspiring Women virtual seminar, or webinar rather, is October 4th and 5th, with the Q&A access on Sunday, October 6th. Knowing Sharon as I do, knowing Heidi Begley, having met Tracy Tennant, who now lives in our area. I need to get her on my program here. And Vicki Joy Anderson. We've become good friends with Vicki and her dad, Jeff. In fact, we'll be having lunch with them over the weekend. I can tell you just from those four women, I've met Leslie Johnson, don't know her well, but just having known the four women I've mentioned, I can say this will not be your stereotypical women's conference. This is not sort of a Christianized version of how to become a girl boss. This is going to be some spiritual and scriptural meat that will be served up at the Inspiring Women webinar. And I know Sharon is looking forward to putting together a presentation for this, and looking forward to seeing how this works out, because I think you're right. Most of the speakers at conferences, prophetic conferences, Bible conference, whatever, tend to be men. And there are certain things that we as men cannot speak to from experience, let's say, that relates to how women are wired and how you all process things. And I can tell you, at least in our household, Sharon is very much more spiritually sensitive than I am. And so I think this is a really good thing that you're doing, Jeannie. And we will do everything we can to get the word out. The link for people is at hearthewatchman.com.
Yes, it'll be available Sunday, I think, when this airs, which happens to be my 65th birthday. So this will be my birthday present, releasing this conference as making it available to all women.
Hey, you've graduated to Medicare. Yay!
Can you believe it?
I'm looking forward to getting to 65 too. Yeah. Jeannie Moore, the website, hearthewatchman.com. Jeannie, thanks for taking time out to tell us about the Inspiring Women webinar.
Thank you so much, Derek. We love you guys.
Again, the link for the Inspiring Women webinar coming up the first weekend in October, featuring Sharon K. Gilbert, Tracy Tennant, Vicki Joy Anderson, Heidi Begley, Leslie Johnson, and more at hearthewatchman.com. That's hearthewatchman.com. Well, latest news from the UK, the National Health Service, they're now requiring doctors, radiologists to be specific, to ask men if they're pregnant. Yes, they have to ask men if they're pregnant. Now, why would they require radiologists to inquire of men whether they're pregnant? Actually, the concept has some merit to it. If you're a woman and you're pregnant, which, by the way, is the only half of the human species that can get pregnant,
if you're a man, if you are an XY on your sex chromosomes, you have no ovaries, you have no uterus, you cannot get pregnant. Sorry, trans women are not women. That's just the bottom line. There are fundamental physiological differences, biological differences between male and female. And in a medical setting, those differences can be really, really important, as in the case of radiology. Somebody going in for a CAT scan, an X-ray, an MRI, the electromagnetic energy used in those scans can harm an unborn child. But I say again, if you are an XY, you're not pregnant. End of story. If I was a patient in the National Health Service, went in for a scan of some sort, and the doctor asked me, "Are you pregnant?" It's like, well, first of all, I'm 62, so no. But secondly, if the beard, the Adam's apple aren't enough of a clue, perhaps I can, demonstrate. Let me just say, if a doctor was to ask me my gender, I'm sorry, I was not assigned male at birth. I am male. And the fact that you're having to ask me this, even if it's a requirement coming from above, does not instill me with confidence that you know what you're talking about. Bless your pointy little head. Well, besides the upcoming conference, that we just talked about with Jeannie Moore, the webinar, the first weekend in October, Inspiring Women. Just a couple of weeks away, I'll be in North Dakota for the Pitchfork and Hoe gathering. That's in the Valley City Eagles Club. Valley City, North Dakota. That's about halfway between Fargo and Jamestown off I-94. And Doug Hamp will be joining me there. I'll be speaking on Saturday and Sunday, September 7th and 8th. The event begins on Friday the 6th. It's essentially a gathering of homesteaders and small farmers for seminars on best practices, a lot of displays, organic foods, organic seeds, things like that. And then a couple of out-of-the-box Christian speakers on Saturday and Sunday. So if you're interested, I hope you'll join us there at the Eagles Club in Valley City, North Dakota, September 7th and 8th. I'll be speaking on Saturday afternoon and Sunday afternoon. More information online at the Pitchfork and Hoe Gathering Facebook page, or you can get to that through our link at our website, gilberthouse.org. Look for the calendar, the upcoming events calendar, or you can find that at our app. We've got an upcoming events calendar there as well. Then December 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, the Christmas in Branson Prophecy Conference. I'll be speaking there. Sharon and I will both be there. I'll be speaking along with Ellie Marzulli, Bill Salas, Ken Johnson, Billy Crone, Josh Peck, Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis, Doug Hershey. Look forward to seeing him again. We haven't seen him in a few years. The author of the coffee table book, Israel Rising. Wonderful stuff. A lot, of course, Prophecy Watchers is putting this on, so they always get the best and best informed prophecy speakers of all. Gary Stearman, Mondo Gonzalez, Josh Peck from Prophecy Watchers will all be there. You can find out more and sign up online at BransonChristmasProphecyConference.com. I think that's the URL. Of course, there's a link at ProphecyWatchers.com also. And, of course, you can follow the link at our website. Look for the upcoming events calendar at gilberthouse.org or at our mobile app. Just go to the calendar section, upcoming events. There is a link to the website, and we hope to see you in Branson. Beautiful hotel, the Chateau on the Lake, overlooking Table Rock Lake. Wonderful. Don't miss this opportunity. Christmas in Branson is a beautiful time to be here. Weather's pretty nice, usually 40s and 50s in early December, and of course, lots of lights. Silver Dollar City, a great place to visit for the holidays with their light displays. So a lot to do other than the conference itself. Make a family vacation out of it. And then, of course, next spring, we are still, actually, talking about Israel, we're still looking forward to November and another solidarity mission in Israel. This would be November 6th through 13th, visiting sites attacked on last October 7th, visiting with injured soldiers at the Shiva Rehabilitation Center in Tel Aviv, Hostage Square, of course. And then, of course, seeing the important sites in the spiritual war in Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, the Mount of Olives, City of David, Western Wall, things like that. We hope to go to Shiloh, where the red heifers are being kept. That is tentatively on the schedule as well. You can find out more at our website, gilberthouse.org/travel. And of course, next spring, March 25th through April 3rd, our 2025 Iron and Myth Tour of Israel. Doug Van Dorn, Judd Burton, and Timothy Alberino, who will be joining us since we canceled his spring conference or his spring tour this year with Tim. Tim has agreed to join us in 2025. Now, a lot depends on what happens in the natural realm with Israel in the next few weeks. We are still waiting, as of this recording on Friday morning, August 16th, still waiting for Iran's threatened response to the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas in Tehran on July 31st. Nothing yet. Hezbollah continues flinging rockets across the border, but nothing like the muscular response that Iran was threatening. If full-scale war breaks out, obviously things will change. We will always have the latest information at our website, gilberthouse.org/travel. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to watch or listen wherever that may be. If you're listening and subscribing through your typical podcatcher site like Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, Amazon Music, Audible, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Pandora, wherever fine podcasts are sold, thank you for subscribing. Give us a good review if you take a spare moment. We'd sure appreciate that. Kudos and a tip of the earbuds to our inimitable announcer, D.C. Good. A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House Ministries, released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. And good night, Oliver, wherever you are. I'm Derek Gilbert. This is A View from the Bunker.